In James chapter 3, James is teaching us that controlling our tongue is absolutely required as Christians. And he gives us 5 reasons why we should control our tongue. And in the last several weeks, we've started looking at these reasons, and so far we've looked at the first 2. We said that number 1, James tells us to control our tongue because its potential to condemn us is so great. Secondly, we said that James tells us to control our tongue because it has such power to control us, to control our lives. Well, today we are going to pick up with the 3rd reason that James tells us to control our tongue. The 3rd reason why we need to control our tongue. And that is, James says, because of its propensity to corrupt us. Because of its propensity to corrupt us. And so this is where we want to pick up from our last time together. You see, as we've discussed, our tongue is very, very dangerous. And in verses 2 through 5, of which we have already looked at, James was simply saying to us that the tongue controls. Now, he didn't say that was bad, and he didn't say that was good. He just said that the tongue has the power to control. It's a controlling member of our body. It wants to dominate us as persons. And it is the key to behavior. And because of its power to control, we must control it. Now, he shows us that the tongue, because of its power to control, is a tremendously dangerous thing. The power to control that the tongue has is not always good. In fact, very often it's bad. And a definite negative tone dominates James' words as he talks about the power of the tongue and its danger in our lives. Now, I want us to look at verse 5 again, because James says this. He says, likewise, the tongue is a small part of the body, but it makes great boast. And then he says this, consider what a great forest is set on fire by a small spark. You see, this is an exclamation by James of the tongue's potential for danger. It has this tremendous potency for destruction and destroying us and others. The text here actually says, literally, how great a forest is set aflame by such a small fire, or literally like this, what sized forest, what sized fire kindles. I mean, the contrast here is absolutely staggering. I want you to think with me for a minute about a forest fire. You can take one small burning cigarette and set thousands and tens of thousands of acres ablaze from just that little cigarette. And fire is really a fascinating thing when you think about it. You can take, one small, little, tiny flame and set a whole city burning to the ground. I mean, fire has an amazing capacity, doesn't it? For example, water can't multiply. If you have a cup of water and you pour it out, it won't become a flood. It can't. But if you have a match, you can light a forest fire or burn down a whole city because fire has such potential to multiply. And the tongue, James says, isn't like water, it's like fire. That's what he compares it to. And it can set a whole forest on fire. And the imagery here is very, very vivid when we understand the picture that James is trying to paint for us. Because in the dry brush of Palestine, where James was, a small spark flying off of a fire in the dry season could set a blaze that would literally cover the landscape and destroy everything in its path. And we know that to be true in our own country, don't we? Especially out west. For example, in California, because the terrain is almost the same as it is in the land of Palestine, there are often wildfires which burn out of control, destroying everything in their path. You'll remember in Chicago on October the 8th, 1871 at 8:30 p.m. there was a spark started in Mrs. O'Leary's barn, and before it was over, that one spark from supposedly that one cow burnt down 17,500 buildings. And not only that, we're told that 300 people were burned to death. 125,000 people were homeless as a result of that fire. And in 1871, that many years ago, they estimated then the damage was at $400 million from one tiny little spark. In 1903, we're told of another story that's true. A pan of rice boiled over onto a charcoal-fired stove in a small home in Korea. And before that little charcoal fire had done its damage, 3,000 buildings were totally burned to the ground within a 1 square mile area. Now, again, that illustrates to us the power of fire. And so what James is saying in verse 5 is literally, wow. You see, likewise means, wow, it's an exclamation. What a great forest is set on fire by such a small spark, James says. And then in verse 6, he goes on and makes his point. He says, here it is. The tongue also is what? James says a fire. The tongue is a fire. In Proverbs 15, verse 28, it says this, the mouth of the wicked pours out wicked, evil things. In Proverbs chapter 16, verse 27, we're told, an ungodly man digs up evil, and in his lips there is a burning fire. Everything his fiery mouth touches is set on fire, and the fire spreads. Proverbs chapter 26, verse 20 tells us, where no wood is, there the fire goes out. So where there is no talebearer, the strife ceases. And the picture here is that the talebearer, or the one who passes on the evil report of the slander or the gossip or the lie, is like the wood that fuels a fire. The same passage says further on in verse 21, but as coals are to burning coals and wood to fire, so is a contentious man to kindle strife. And the word kindle literally means to burn up. The picture is again of gossip and slander and contention being exactly like a fire that devastates everything in its way. In Psalm 52, verse 2, it says this, the tongue devises mischief like a sharp razor. Now that's also a fascinating picture of the tongue, isn't it? That the tongue is like a razor, that it cuts. You know, there's a true story about a man who actually picked up a prostitute, and as he leaned over to kiss her, she had between her lips a razor blade with which she instantaneously literally sliced off both of his lips, his top lip and his lower lip. You see, that was her way of getting back at men who somehow had caused her injury or hurt her in her past. And the only thing more devastating and powerful than that razor blade is the tongue itself. The tongue is a fire that kindles and burns. Not only James says, but the rest of Scripture tells us as well. That same Psalm 52 verse 2, which says the tongue is a sharp razor, also says this in verses 3 and 4. Thou lovest evil more than good, and lying rather than to speak righteousness. Thou lovest all devouring words, O deceitful tongue. God shall likewise destroy thee forever. He shall take thee away and pluck thee out of thy dwelling place. You see, God will judge those whose tongues do damage. In Psalm 57 verse 4, the psalmist writes, My soul is among lions. I lie, meaning I lay down, even among them that are set on fire, even the sons of men whose teeth are spears and arrows, and their tongue is a sharp sword. In Job chapter 19 verse 2, he says this, How long will you crush me with your words? You see, the devastating power of a tongue to start a rumor, to spread a malignant lie, and to spread evil in its intent is a dangerous wildfire that can't be stopped. What used to be, my greatest fear in the ministry when I was a young man, a young pastor, is what people might say about me or my ministry. It was the idea that someone might say something that isn't true and would totally destroy my ministry. You see, people can say anything they want to say. And the evil of people's tongues can do irreparable damage to others. I mean, the tongue is a fire. It's devastating and it must be controlled. There's a sports writer for the Atlanta Journal who once wrote these words, and he said, I quote, I am more deadly than the screaming shell from the howitzer. I win without killing. I tear down homes, break hearts, and wreck lives. I travel on the wings of the wind. No innocence is strong enough to intimidate me. No purity pure enough to daunt me. I have no regard for truth, no respect for justice, no mercy for the defenseless. My victims are as numerous as the sands of the sea, and often as innocent. I never forget and seldom forgive. And my name is gossip. That's why Proverbs chapter 10 verse 19 says, He who restrains his lips is wise. In other words, don't be fuel for anybody's fire. Don't be the wood or the coal that keeps the fire going and keeps it burning. And then notice verse 6 again. James says, the tongue also is a fire, and then this, the tongue is a world of evil. He says, the tongue also is a fire, a world of evil among the parts of the body. It corrupts the whole body, sets the whole course of one's life on fire, and is itself set on fire by hell. Now, in that verse, there are 4 key dangers James says here regarding the tongue. And I want you to listen carefully because they warn us about the danger of the tongue. Now, we're going to look at the first 3 of these 4 dangers today. And then I want to really spend some time on number 4 as we begin the message next week. But number 1, James says our tongue is a system of evil. It's a system of evil. Now, that's a strange title for a tongue, a world or a cosmos of evil. Now, the word cosmos we often translate as world, which James uses the word cosmos, that we translate world. But it's world not in the sense of the globe of the earth, not in the sense of the physical earth. But that word cosmos is used to describe a system of evil which is present in our world, the earth. And what he's saying is the tongue is an iniquitous or sinful system. It's an unrighteous, hostile, rebelling order within our humanness. It's a potential evil that falls way short of God's standard of righteousness and holiness, and it's the focal point of behavioral unrighteousness within all of mankind. You see, the tongue literally inflames all of our tendencies, all of our capacities in our being in its effort to bring our whole person, our whole being, into its wicked, vile, sinful system. The sinful, wicked system present in this world. And the tongue wants us to literally fall into that, to bring us into that. And no other bodily part has as such a far-reaching potential and capacity for disaster in our lives as our little tongue. So first of all, James says the tongue is a system of evil. That's the first danger of the tongue. It breeds evil. And then secondly, James says, the second danger is the tongue corrupts the whole body, the entire body. You see, the tongue in and of itself is a system of evil. And then secondly, James says it defiles our entire body, the whole body. It's like smoke from a fire. It stains everything that doesn't burn. I mean, have you ever owned, something that you wore which had suffered smoke damage? And after being damaged by smoke, it literally smelled like it was on fire. You see, smoke stains everything that doesn't burn up. And in the same way, the tongue is this raging fire, and what it can't consume, it will ruin and stain with its putrid, foul smoke. And so we have right in our body, behind our teeth, and walled in by our mouth, this system of evil or iniquity that wants to literally run off on its own and destroy our entire being, our entire body. And what it does is stain your whole person with its evil intent. James says it's among the parts of our body. It's placed among our members or our bodily parts. And it means it's included within all of our human capacities. And the tongue stains it all. He uses the word corrupts. Now, understand with me that that's a very vivid word, the word corrupts. It's also used in the little one-chapter book of Jude in the New Testament, in verse 23 of that book, and it means to pollute. When he says the word corrupts, it literally means to pollute. And Jude says, save others by snatching them from the fire. To others show mercy mixed with fear, hating even the clothing stained by corrupted flesh, something that has been made gross or evil or wretched. So Having a filthy tongue results in being a filthy person. A filthy tongue stains the entire person, the whole person. What world of evil is set loose in our mouths either burns or smoke stains our whole person, our entire being. It's what Mark chapter 7 verse 20 talks about when it says, that which comes out of the man defiles the man. And then down in verse 23, it says, all these evil things come from within and defile the man. And what are these things? Well, he mentions among them deceit, lasciviousness, blasphemy, pride, foolishness, and all of these things involve sins of the tongue. So a person is morally blackened by what the tongue says. And James says in verse 6 that the tongue corrupts the whole body, which simply means the entire person, the whole person. The word body is used in the same way soul is used. It doesn't just mean your physical body or being. It means the total person, both the physical and the immaterial part of man, our soul. So first of all, in your mouth and mine, we have a system of evil. Secondly, this system of evil, James says, will stain and burn your whole person. It will corrupt the entire being. And thirdly, the third danger James talks about is this. He says, the tongue sets your life ablaze. It sets your life ablaze. Now notice, it expands again even further. James says it sets the whole course of one's life on fire, is what he says. A better translation of that is this. It is setting, like in the present tense, it is setting on fire the circle of life, literally, is how it could be translated. And what does that mean? Well, the thought here is expanding, as I said. First, the tongue is a system of evil, the cosmos of evil. Second, the tongue stains our entire being. It expands to our entire being, this system of evil. And then third, James says it literally sets ablaze, and the Greek is the wheel of birth, or the circle of life. And it literally means the whole machinery of your life. It not only stains you, but it stains everything you touch. It affects the whole machinery of your life. Everything you touch, whatever you touch, it affects that as well. And it goes beyond just your body to touch every participant in the circle of your life and mine. You see, people know you by how you talk, right? They know you by how you speak, how you talk. The tongue reaches beyond your mouth to stain your entire body, and it reaches beyond just your being to touch the whole network of people that are touched by you. You know, gossip, rumors, slander, false accusations, lies, and evil speech can stain and pollute and destroy what? A whole family. Yes, even your family members can be affected by you. A whole group of people, not just your family, but maybe the people with whom you work or are involved with. A school, a church, yes, even the church, or even within the community. We literally, through our lives, reach beyond us, and it expands so that our tongue can affect all of those other people with whom are in the network of our connections. Well, then he speaks of a fourth factor, a fourth danger, which is the most devastating statement on the danger of the tongue. And we're going to pick up with this next week, because I want to focus specifically on this fourth danger for a bit. because it continues to progress in the impact of the tongue and what the tongue can do in our lives. I hope you'll join me next week as we continue with our study of why I should control my tongue.